The UN finally agrees on a roadmap to help migrants and refugees worldwide. What's called the Global Compact has just been adopted in Marrakesh, but will it work? And can a compromise be reached with the countries that rejected the agreement? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story from Marrakesh in Morocco. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. The Global Compact for Migration was adopted here after 2 years of intense negotiations, but some of the signatories remain divided. The compact is non-binding, but for the UN, this is a unique opportunity for world leaders to address the migration and refugee crisis. The agreement stresses the need to protect migrants, resettle them, and allow access to schools and healthcare. But the US, Italy, Hungary, Austria, and other countries pulled out of the deal, saying it encourages illegal migration and threatens their sovereignty. We'll go to our guests shortly, but first, Paul Brennan has this report from Austria.
In Vienna and across Central Europe, the traditional Christmas markets are well underway. They're symbolic of a Christian heritage and a sense of European cultural identity. In 2016, the European nations led the campaign for a global solution to the migration crisis. But a string of populist election victories since then means the UN compact, which emerged from that crisis, is being disowned by its architects. First to go was Hungary.
We see that pact coming into the field of national sovereignty. Certainly it is trying to make migration a human right, which, if you take a closer look, is opening Pandora's box.
That's a perspective, though, that the United Nations insists is just plain wrong. The UN says that the compact is not legally binding and does not create any new human rights. Furthermore, it says national sovereignty over migration is explicitly protected in the document, so long as it complies with international law. But it's caveats just like that which have been pounced upon by Europe's new nationalists, with Austria leading the way. Researchers point to a new generation of politicians across Europe who understand that migration can sway elections.
It seems that migration is one of the only remaining topics where somehow nation states are seeing how they can uphold this illusion of control and sovereignty. And certainly it's also related to more and more polarized public debate.
After Austria followed Hungary, more fell like dominoes. Slovakia, Italy, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Poland and Switzerland have all either withdrawn or suspended their participation. Why? Because according to one academic, by starting from a pro-migration stance, the UN compact underestimated and ignored the concerns of individual citizens.
There are no kind of conditions where it's the limit of migration, right? There's no kind of, it completely ignores the potential cultural aspects, which I think are increasingly important for most Europeans. And I think what we see in most countries is, right, it's not so much the economic side that people voice about migration. I think it's kind of a fear of loss of cultural identity.
The numbers of refugees entering Europe has dropped sharply since the height of the migrant crisis in 2015. But the challenge of how to address future crises remains. NGOs are warning that nationalism cannot solve global problems.
Not signing the compact means not participating in the solution, being not part in the solution of the global challenge. And if I want to tackle the challenge seriously, then I have to be part of the global community.
Christmas is a season of goodwill, where families gather and exchange gifts. In Europe's increasingly nationalistic political landscape, though, charity begins and ends at home. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, Vienna.
Let's now talk to our guests who are joining us here in Marrakesh. Stephen Kampyongo, he is the Home Affairs Minister of Zambia. Michelle Levoy, she is the Director of the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants. And Leonard Doyle, He's the spokesperson of the International Organization for Migration. Welcome to you all. Mr. Kampyongo, how significant is the adoption by 164 member states of the Global Compact for Migration?
It's indeed quite significant. And I think, speaking on behalf of my president, President Edgar Chagwa, the President of the Republic of Zambia, who could have been here had it not been for other pressing duties. It was great for me to represent him because he was among the heads of states who witnessed the declaration of New York, the 2016 declaration, which then recommended the adoption of two compacts, one for migrants and one for the refugees. And so being here today, because the recommendation was to have those two compacts adopted within 2018. And so having that being done within time, as recommended, is significant and deserves to be commended. And we can only appreciate those that were behind the negotiations that went on after the 2016 declaration, New York declaration.
Ms. Levoy, I mean, we've seen reactions from the United Nations Secretary General, from member states, basically saying that this could be a turning point. Do you share that general sentiment?
Yes, because it really offers a framework for states to show what their commitments are to upholding the human rights of migrants. And it shows in 23 objectives how they should be doing that. Significant is looking at issues such as access to services, including healthcare or education for migrants, regardless of status, access to justice, trying to also prevent irregular migration by developing more regular channels, such as in the area of labor migration, labor mobility schemes, family reunification, academic mobility. Without having proper regular channels that are accessible to migrants, that's actually what's creating irregular migration.
Mr. Doyle, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, how in practical terms would this compact be able to find answers to questions like basic rights for migrants, access to schools, healthcare, and resettlement, which is a huge challenge?
I think the important thing is that you have, for the first time, the international community debating over 2 years all of the aspects of migration. So they've looked into all of these aspects, from security to border management to protection to returns to the rights of children, child migrants. So it's a policy in the round. And the important thing is that now you have a sort of joined up thinking at the international level. So when problems arise, as they will arise, and they'll arise unexpectedly, there is a place to go, there's precedent, and there's a cooperation agreement. I think that's the big thing, that there's a framework here that countries can rally around and seek support, and the international community can in turn support them.
Now, Mr. Kampyongo, I mean, what's next? If the US under Obama in 2016 was championing the idea of building bridges between nations, has now under Trump turned its back on the deal, saying that it poses threats to its sovereignty. How is it possible to implement the deal when the key player is not on board?
First of all, it's indeed regrettable that some member states have opted to pull out of the deal. But as an AU member state, we are comforted by the fact that the reliable information I have so far is that there is no AU member state that have indicated that they would pull out of the deal. And so before we think of other member states away from the continent of Africa, we have heightened debate around the migration issues and focusing on the free movement of our people from one member state to another. And so we have to contextualize it within the continent.
Michelle, you've been working hard to raise international awareness about the plight of the undocumented migrants who seem to be the underdog or overshadowed by all this political debate. In practical terms, what's good news here for them and what's bad news?
A lot of the objectives in the Global Compact recognize that migrants have fundamental human rights, and regardless of migration status. And so when we talk about, for example, access to healthcare services, it draws on what many member states are actually already doing, and it really demonstrates what the commitment should be regardless of status. access to justice, for example. An undocumented woman who might experience gender-based violence many times is afraid to actually go and report that to the police, or to go to the emergency room of the hospital, or even to go to a women's shelter. So this compact actually defines what access to justice should be, also for migrants regardless of status. And the fact that states are signing up to this represents a strong commitment to recognize that undocumented migrants do have fundamental rights and that they have to be applied in practice. And that's actually through ensuring things such as firewalls, which is a separation between immigration enforcement and access to services and justice, so that they can safely report, for example.
Leonard, is it still possible in the near future to reconcile the differences between those who opted to pull out, saying this is not good for them, and those who seem to be committed to move forward with an international platform that would tackle all the issues related to migration and refugees?
I think it is, of course it is, because this is, at the end of the day, a voluntary agreement. It's a voluntary framework. And the point is that it doesn't undermine, it doesn't interfere with the sovereignty of nation states when it comes to migration. And that's terribly important, because however big you are, however small you are, you want to be able to have some control over who's coming in and out of your country. You want to be sure that it's safe. So over time, as this kind of works its way through, and as politics change around the world, surely some people will come back and maybe some will leave. But the important point is that the overwhelming majority of the world's countries have decided that there is now a rational space to discuss migration. I think that's the important thing, because in the absence of this agreement, we were left to the kind of rather Wild West extremes of the far left social media and the far right and all the fake news that was thrown into that mix, which tended to run to the agenda. Now we've had a kind of sit down, and they've teased out many of the very intractable issues around migration. They're not easy, as I'm sure the minister can attest. Migration affects every country, and every community is deeply concerned about it. So finding a framework within which you can do that is extremely helpful.
Mr. Kampyongo, I mean, in Africa, you say that you are united as a continent about the issue of migration and refugees. But you know, the criticism advanced against the continent is basically its political leadership has been disconnected from reality, and it is to blame for the situation there. Had it not been for the poor governance, poverty, inefficiency, autocracy, people wouldn't ever have thought about moving elsewhere.
Well, that could be part of the reason many people would front. We must also realize that there are other factors now that are triggering movement of the people. Climate change, for example. You know, so these are new factors. So even when you want to apportion blame on reasons such as poor leadership, it's not everywhere. And I think progress has been made on the continent and ensuring that democracy becomes a way of allowing people to choose leadership in various EU member states, as well as in sub-regions of the African continent. Of course, in the past, we can avoid acknowledging the challenges which triggered movements, forced movements of people running away from the places called homes in search for sanctuary, in search for peace. And these are challenges we have lived with over some time. And I think there is also realization amongst the leadership of the continent to say each time we stabilize the continent and make sure that our people are able to benefit from the natural capital that this continent is endowed with. And that can only be achieved when we have got stability and people are able to participate in terms of realizing the potentials of their member states.
Michel, an undocumented migrant who's watching us, who's stranded in the midst of nowhere and wants to understand how this is going to positively affect his life, or a child who has been arrested or detained while his family was trying to cross from Mexico to the US, or someone whose family is trying to cross from Syria, Turkey, all the way towards Europe. Is this deal providing some safeties and guarantees for them not to be arrested or mistreated in the future?
It's an excellent question, and that's the one that we will have to work out, is through the implementation.
And the devil lies in the details.
Exactly. So basically, while this offers a framework, the next step is how countries are going to implement this. And that will be the biggest challenge. So for example, one of the objectives talks about providing alternatives to detention, working with civil society to actually to develop them. So how will those also be carried out in practice? Governments will have to work with civil society to actually develop them so that children won't be detained, and that's actually one of the objectives, is to work towards ending the detention of children. It also works at providing safe passages for migrants to be able to move regularly, but this will also have to be developed. And the other point that I also wanted to mention is cities. Which levels of government need to also be involved besides the national level? Local and regional authorities play a key role, and especially cities. Cities is actually where many of the migrants are also gaining access to services and justice currently.
I met earlier with Khalid Zawali, who is the head of the Migration and Border Control at the Moroccan Ministry of Interior, and asked him about the significance of the deal and what it means for Morocco, but also for Africa.
Well, migration is a human matter. It's not a problem. It's not a mathematical equation. It will happen anyway. Either we do it in a safe, regular and orderly manner, or it's gonna be done by the traffickants and criminal groups. So it's an opportunity for everybody to work in the same direction, so that we can have, so that we can make migration a choice, not a constraint or an obligation for migrants.
Morocco has always been a transit point for thousands of migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. If Europe decides one day, because we will see the pattern, the far right and the populist governments in Europe gaining control. If they decide one day to build walls, what would be the next step for Morocco?
Morocco has built a great deal of expertise, because Morocco was a country of origin, country of transit and country of destination. So we have differentiated our strategies depending on what kind of migration we're talking about. The last one was in 2013, where His Majesty decided to grant the regularization for 50,000 migrants. They are enjoying our hospitality. They are contributing in enriching our culture. It's not a matter of blocking migrants. It's a matter of how we can integrate migrants within our societies. So the message is, today the Global Compact offers an opportunity for the international community to work in a positive way and make migration something positive rather than something fearful.
Leonard, but at the same time we have to be fair to those who are skeptical about the deal. The people in Europe or the United States of America who say that this is a world where you have 70 million people forced out of their home, 24 million refugees, half of them under the age of 18. Why do we have to pay the price for something we haven't created ourselves?
Very important question, and I think it's the key question. While we rightly support the rights of migrants, the human rights of migrants, and the rights of refugees, and the rights of undocumented, displaced, undocumented people, and those who've been displaced, we also, at our peril, ignore the concerns of the host communities, the people living in places where migrants are coming to. It's quite easy, you know, in one way, to be part of the bandwagon supporting this, and we should be. But if at the same time we are callous or cruel to our fellow citizens and say, time that you got a job, mate, you need to work a bit harder, we're asking for trouble. And I think that's actually what we're seeing in many parts of the world. We're seeing a reaction to people who are feeling fearful for the future, fearful that a migrant might take their job. In fact, it's probably not a migrant but a robot, but they might blame the migrant. Unless we address those fears head on, unless we reassure people that this is a journey we need to make together, that the future of so many countries, the well-being of so many countries depends on migrants, we are in trouble.
Mr. Kampyongo, the African Union has agreed on a vision, 2030, and about the need to put an end to instability, conflicts, wars, to end the issue of the people displaced in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Sudan, different parts of Africa. And your critics say basically you failed to address those issues, and then you're coming to the richest nations to provide you help or to police a world order that you failed to protect yourselves.
First, before I respond to that, I just also want to add on those member states that are skeptical. You can understand. you can't avoid to discuss the demographic impact of migration on the hosting states. You know very well that each country plans for its people, premised on the demographic. The figures are variable and needs are planned. Health services, education, and all other social services that are required to be provided to the people by government. And so they unplanned for arrivals, influx of people.
Put some strains on the economy.
Strain, exactly. You imagine, especially for our small economies, you've done your annual budgets, and from nowhere you've got this huge number of people coming with children and malnourished, who require to be sustained.
So what do you suggest? Do you think there needs to be a international solidarity fund, for example?
There is need for compatibility. In short, we are saying the host nations and their sending nations, there must be some engagement, because you can deal probably with the issue of huge movements before the people are on the move. If there is mutual engagement.
I want you to answer also my second question about if you're asking the world to do what you failed to do in terms of putting an end to instability, conflicts and wars, which were the main reason for the influx of thousands and thousands of refugees and migrants inside Africa.
I totally agree with you, but I think we have made a lot of progress in that regard, and I think we have seen countries now accepting democracy as a way of changing leadership and making sure that people are able to exercise their right to choose people that are able to meet their aspirations in member states. We may have challenges in a few countries, of course, but I think it's our desire to try and make sure that the whole continent is stable, and then we can explore the potential that lies on the African continent. We still have, I think, account for a huge number of natural capital.
Untapped resources, unprecedented, definitely. Michel, I mean, this is a fast-moving political landscape worldwide. If you look at the map of Europe, there are many countries like Germany, Spain, and many other countries where the far right will definitely use this particular card of the compact here in Marrakesh to advance their political agendas. If they come to power, they will automatically pull out of this deal. Is this something that could undermine the whole effort, the mammoth task that started in 2016 and that ushered in this particular declaration?
I don't think that if that does occur, it will undermine the whole effort, because the whole effort is still the whole. This would still be a minority of countries that, in a sense, would respond to, I think as Leonard was describing, the fears of many people by fearing that they're left out, and fearing that because of the economic downturn that happened in many countries almost 10 years ago, they have felt left out. And so it's really important to counter populism and to try to make sense of where people are coming from and to understand their fears. But migrants are never a scapegoat for that. Migrants are part of the solution to many of the problems. Migrants actually are vibrant, they enrich our societies. And so that is actually what the world community is recognizing, and also recognizing that this is part of our shared humanity. I mean, it is historical that we as a species have always migrated. So actually the adoption today is only one step further in acknowledging what we've always done.
Leonard, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about the strains that the issue of migration is now putting on countries in the south, like Africa. Europe still has massive potential, solid economy. It was able sometimes to handle the issue of migration. But Africa, where countries are suffering from a huge political and economic process, and we've seen the pattern, which is basically the increased number of refugees in those places. Is this something that is alarming for the International Organization for Migration?
I think you've, if I may, you've taken a glass half full approach to this thing. The contrast I would suggest is that Africa is one of the most dynamic parts of the world, if not the most. And what we've seen in Asia, what we've seen in China over the last 20 years and in India, we will be seeing it over the next 20 years in Africa. As you add 1 billion young people to the population, as megacities grow, we're already seeing it. There is an enormous energy in Africa, there's enormous economic growth. Of course there are problems. Undoubtedly there are conflict, of course there are. But the bigger picture, I think, is one of great optimism. And one of the extraordinary things we see in West Africa is the ECOWAS, where you can travel visa-free. You can get on the bus in one country and travel through 4 or 5 countries without anybody stopping you. And this is not creating problems, this is actually creating economic positives. So long may that live, and long may that be an example to the rest of the world.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Looking forward to talking to you in the near future about the implication of this major agreement that has been reached here in the city of Marrakesh in Morocco. Stephen Kampyongo, Michel Levoy, Leonard, Doyle, thank you very much for being on the Inside Story with us. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here in Marrakesh and in Doha. Bye for now.